before you mentioned, actually, I think it was Ken who mentioned the drones.
Yeah.
Given what Ukraine just did to Russia, is there any sense in India that there may be a need for a different way to think about strategic posture?
Sir, again, as I said, these are things the military is thinking about. I mean, all I can say is that the world of warfare has been changing dramatically since the beginning of the Ukraine conflict. And increasingly, the use of drones, for example, it's striking that neither country actually crossed over into the other's airspace at any stage of these 4 days. Everything is being done from a distance now. Drones, missiles, technologies have moved quite significantly. What was old-fashioned and awful and tragic was the indiscriminate Pakistani artillery shelling, which should never have been done in the manner it was. I mean, but you can understand why. We hit terror bases. There are no terror bases in India to hit. There are no terrorist organizations in India listed in the UN or the State Department anywhere else. So what do you hit? You hit civilians. You hit innocent people. That is the asymmetry of this particular conflict. We have tried not just to be precise and calibrated in our response, but we have tried systematically to signal we are not interested in war with Pakistan. We're not interested in attacking Pakistani civilians, ordinary people. This is about India versus terrorism. And as far as we're concerned, situating the problem where it belongs is if you don't want places in your territory to be hit because they're housing terrorists, why don't you shut down the safe havens? Why don't you arrest these leaders? Why don't you close their bank accounts? Why don't you disband these organizations or call them illegal? If you're not prepared to do any of that, then I'm afraid this is the only way we can deal with it, because we are not going to sit back at our homes and be hit at your convenience. That's not going to happen.
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't hear you very well. Do repeat that.
Puneet Talwar.
Yeah,
good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Most recently, U.S. Ambassador to Morocco. And I wanted to ask you, you mentioned that during the engagement, the military engagement, that China's technology was at the top level was provided to Pakistan. So they had cutting edge technology. You managed to penetrate that. So I want to just press you a little bit more on that. Is the sense in the strategic community and top level politicians like yourself that India stacks up just fine against Chinese technology, or is there some sense of concern or reassessment going on in a serious way about where this leaves India relative to China?
Puneet, I think, frankly, the reassessment took place while the fighting was going on. In other words, when we saw what the Pakistanis were attempting to do, using, as you say, Chinese technology, there's supposed to be something called a kill chain that the Chinese specialize in, where the radar, GPS, planes and missiles are all linked together and they react instantly. All this is stuff I'm reading in public military analyses. It's not something I've got from any classified source. But when we saw that, we simply did things in a different way. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to hit the 11 airfields, and we wouldn't have been able to breach the Chinese supplied air defenses. So it's clear that assessments were taking place while the fighting was happening, and we were recalibrating our strategies in order to end as effectively as we were able to end. So that, I think, is the short answer. The longer answer, I'm afraid, only the military can provide. I mean, you and I have been at various ends of the policy spectrum in your country and in mine, but we haven't really been sitting in military headquarters. So I'll take a pass on how much further we can go on that. By the way, on the Chinese technology, I may have slightly misspoken, because my understanding is, for example, the aircraft given is the Chinese J-10, whereas the Chinese themselves have a J-20, which is apparently one or half a generation newer. And who knows if they'll supply that. I mean, the fact is China has immense stakes in Pakistan. The largest single project of the Belt and Road Initiative is the one in Pakistan, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. So we have no illusions about the degree of commitment that China may well be feeling towards Pakistan.
Samir.
Thank you, sir. Samir Lawani from CSBA. I wanted to ask a question. Leaving aside motives, the question is about effects. So you said that we had to show them that they had to pay a price. My question is, what is your sense of whether Pakistan believes they paid a price, whether the military, the politicians, the civilians, the population? And I ask that in light of the fact that the military army chief received a 5th star. There seems to be a lot of triumphalism. So did they actually feel that price, and does that affect their behavior in the future?
I think one of the principal motives for this horrific terror attack, which was signaled, by the way, a few days earlier by a speech by the Pakistani military chief in which he made the astonishingly bigoted assertion that Muslims could not live in a non-Muslim majority country, which is kind of a bizarre thing to say given the number of non-Muslim majority countries in which Muslims can be found, including the fact that we have 200 million Muslims in India who are living in peace with their neighbors. And one of them is a member of my delegation, I might add. He's sitting right here. So I just want to say, Sarfraz Ahmad sitting right there. I just say this simply because one of the objectives was clearly to shore up the Pakistani army in a situation where they were deeply unpopular, with the most popular leader in Pakistan sitting in jail for the last couple of years, and the economy stagnant, and the government that they have been running or manipulating not doing very well in public opinion. And clearly, whatever happened in the conflict that was bound to ensue after the terrorist strike, they were going to declare victory for the army. So there was a lot of chuckling in Delhi when the failed general became a field marshal. But I mean, that's the sort of thing that by promoting himself, as you said, with that extra star, because that was definitely going to be the army's gain from this fight with India. They wanted, once again, to show themselves as the savior of the nation in the face of attacks by a bigger power. The fact is that they provoked those attacks. We were very happy leaving them alone. We had no desire to start this. But when they provoked these attacks by the terrorist strike, we gave them, if you like, a ready-made opportunity to come up with a narrative they'd already pre-decided they wanted. And so that's all right. That's what happened. We have no particular complaints or regrets. If that makes them feel that they can stop fighting, it saves us the bother of continuing this unnecessary fight. Remember, for India, this war is a distraction. For the Pakistani military, it's fundamental to its sense of importance, its sense of success in its own society. You know, some of you here must have read Voltaire on Prussia. In India, the state has an army. In Pakistan, the army has a state. And the army is going to do always what's in its best interest. That's essentially what we saw happening. But I do want to stress that as far as India is concerned, we don't care what they say to their public. We know what's happened. And frankly, the satellite pictures are not Indian pictures. There is absolutely no evidence that the Pakistan has been able to advance in support of its claim to have inflicted magnificent victories and great damage on India and so on. Absolutely no evidence. 2 videos came out on social media. Both turned out to be from other conflicts and other years. Nothing to do with this one. So all I'll say is, more power to the Pakistani military than take it anyway. But that's what this is all about in terms of their narrative.
Okay, in the back and then here. Yeah.
Hi, Maureen Ahmed from State Department. I've covered South Asia and India in the past, asking a question in personal capacity. Lots of Pakistan stuff, so stepping back a bit in the South Asia region writ large. Lots of different changes on political landscapes in Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal. India's had strong relationships in the past, but how is it going to handle these changing landscapes, especially as these countries have a more of a lean now towards China? How are they, recalculating this calculus, especially in Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, nearby? So would love to hear your perspective.
That's a vast subject, young lady. I think we'll really have to do an entire seminar on that. But I'll start off with one simple proposition, that we have the sort of same kind of big country in the neighborhood problem that the U.S. has had for ages. I don't know how many of you remember the Mexican president, Porfirio Diaz, saying, "My poor Mexico, so far from God and so close to the United States." I mean, many small countries in our neighborhood are bound to have the sort of feeling about being so far from wherever and so close to India. So China does come in and play a role. I mean, there's no doubt about that. They've all reached out. China can be a fairly munificent supplier of funds. Very often they are loans and not grants, and some of them involve unsustainable debt obligations on the part of the recipients. And so, yes, I mean, you've implied there are certain issues we need to address. We will, but it'll take too long to give you a short answer, other than to say that the neighborhood is of great importance to us. We, as a country, have always appreciated the fact that when we sit around the table with our neighbors, we account for 70% of the landmass and 80% of the GDP. I mean, we have a responsibility to care for the well-being of our neighbors, and we are conscious of that. In fact, we were trying to make a go of the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, but Pakistan obstructed that on the grounds that they could not have these relationships blossoming as long as they had a grouse with India. And unfortunately, the South Asian Association worked on consensus, and so nothing could get done. India still has now revived another sub-regional organization called BIMSTEC, the Bay of Bengal Initiative, which does not include Pakistan, and sadly it doesn't include the Maldives either, because they're to the west of the Bay of Bengal, but all the countries to the east, including Thailand and Myanmar, are part of this initiative. So it's not that we are in any way backing off from regional cooperation. We want it, but there are specific challenges, and it'll take too long to discuss them, but we can go country by country at some point. I'm sure my colleagues at the Indian Embassy will be happy to help a State Department person on that.
You have to stand up.
That shouldn't be allowed. This is my son.
Shashi Tharoor of the Washington Post. Definitely asking a question in personal capacity. And mostly to say hi before you go off to your next engagement.
Raise the mic.
Mostly to say hi before you go off to your next engagement. I'm curious, though, on this tour you've been on, various countries in the Western Hemisphere, have any of your government interlocutors asked you to show evidence of Pakistan's culpability in the initial attack? And what do you say to the repeated Pakistani denials of having any hand in the initial attack?
Okay, well, I'm very glad you raised this, Shashi. I didn't plant it, I promise you. This guy does this to his dad. Very simply, no one had any doubt, and we were not asked for evidence. But media have asked, and so you are speaking for your tribe in that in 2 or 3 places media asked this question. Let me say very clearly that India would not have done this without convincing evidence. But there were 3 particular reasons I want to draw your attention to, all of you. The first is that we've had a 37-year pattern of repeated terror attacks from Pakistan, accompanied by repeated denials. I mean, Americans haven't forgotten that Pakistan didn't know, allegedly, where Osama bin Laden was until he was found in a Pakistani safe house right next to an army camp in a cantonment city. That's Pakistan. Mumbai attacks, they denied having anything to do with it. One of the terrorists was captured alive. His name, his identity, his address in Pakistan, everything was revealed. Under interrogation, he told us where he was trained, what was done. The US intelligence, as well as ours, recorded the chilling voice of the Pakistani handler giving minute-by-minute instructions to the killers in Mumbai, telling them where to go. And they were monitoring Indian TV and saying, there are people hiding on the 3rd floor of that hotel, go and shoot them there. This kind of thing is going on. Your sources recorded this too. So we know what Pakistan's all about. They will dispatch terrorists. They will deny they did so until they're actually caught with red hands. That's the first. So I agree you're going to say, but that's circumstantial. Sure. Second point. The moment this happened, within 45 minutes or so of this happening, the terrorist attack, a group called the Resistance Front claimed credit. Who are the Resistance Front? They're a well-known proxy front of the Lashkar-e-Taiba, a banned organization listed by the United Nations, listed by the US State Department, which enjoys safe haven in the town of Murid-K in Pakistan. The Resistance Front, evidence about the Resistance Front and its doings was presented by India to the UN Committee on Terrorism in December 2023 and repeatedly again in 24. But the problem was, of course, Pakistan too is a member of that committee. The Resistance Front was not listed by the UN, but its identity was known and publicized. These people then claimed credit within a time span. There were no media present when these killings took place. Most of the world hadn't even learned about this when they claimed credit. So that was itself a smoking gun. They repeated that claim 24 hours later. And having repeated that claim 24 hours later, then their handlers must have woken up to the gravity of this and told them to take it off their site. So they did. But the fact is, the credit claim was on record and the world has seen it. Third, when the first strikes happened on the terrorist camps, funerals were conducted, including for members of some of the key organizations, the Jaish-e-Mohammed in particular, and the Lashkar-e-Taiba. The funerals were conducted, and photographs have emerged on social media showing Pakistani generals and police officers in uniform attending these funerals, being conducted by relatives of these terrorists. So we're looking at three concrete pieces of evidence as far as India is concerned. But finally, I can add to the mix, we also have intelligence services. They have been studying very carefully these terrorist attacks. They have identified at least 4 of the 5 perpetrators, and they know who they are. In fact, I'm told, and I don't have access to the direct intelligence information, but I've been reliably informed, they know that 2 of them are Pakistanis, and the other 2 were locals who had exfiltrated, is the term, out to Pakistan for training 10 years ago, and clearly were sent back for this mission this time. So it's on the basis of all of this put together that we said, we know who did this, and we will take action. And that's exactly what we did. I can assure you India is not the kind of country that would undertake a military operation without very solid basis for doing so. This was not some random terror attack. I must say our government counts 24 terrorist attacks in the course of last year emanating from Pakistan, but none of them required this kind of response. We dealt with them. We either got the terrorists or killed them. Minimal damage, very little loss of life. We dealt with it. This showed all the hallmarks of a sophisticated, planned, deliberate operation with reconnaissance, with intelligence work, with a modus operandi worked out, this cynical exercise of asking people their religion, shooting them between the eyes. This is not an ordinary terrorist, some bearded fanatic blowing himself up outside a supermarket. This is not that. This is a serious quasi-military style operation, and it required a military response.